Welcome to This Explainer. We're diving into something super fascinating today: the intense ideological friction that Hindu studies currently face in Western academia, and how that very tension has sparked a movement to build dedicated, independent Hindu universities right here in the United States. It's a really compelling story about demographics, deep philosophical clashes, and a modern quest for authentic representation.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll hit demographics and institutional representation, ideological challenges in academia, clashing systems of knowledge, the push for Hindu universities, a quick comparison of HUA and VAYU, and wrap up with the future of Hindu studies. Let's get right to it. Section 1. Demographics and institutional representation. Okay, to really grasp what's going on here, we've got to look at the baseline numbers.
There are roughly 3.3 to 3.6 million Hindus living in the US right now. And here's what's absolutely crucial to know. This is a highly educated group. In fact, they're the highest earning religious demographic in the whole country, with over 57% pulling in 100 grand or more.
And their financial footprint? It's literally massive. Indian Americans have chipped in an estimated $3 billion, yes, billion with a B, to American universities just since 2008. That's a staggering amount of capital flowing straight into the higher ed system from this specific community.
But when you look at the actual institutional landscape, the gap is wild. Look at this breakdown. We're talking over 1,000 Christian and Jewish affiliated universities, places like Yeshiva or Brandeis, along with several Islamic colleges and hundreds of K-12 schools. But for Hindus, despite all that demographic success and those massive financial contributions we just talked about, there are near zero established mainstream Hindu universities.
Which brings us to the obvious question, right? Why? How does a community with so many resources, a community that clearly values education so highly, lack its own dedicated universities? Well, to figure that out, we have to dig into some deep ideological frictions baked right into the current academic establishment.
That brings us to Section 2. Ideological challenges in academia. Here's where things get intense. Critics argue that Western academia often boxes Hinduism into some really restrictive, specific lenses. For example, students are often taught to view the entire religion primarily through the lens of caste, or take a concept like karma. It's frequently portrayed just as fatalism, totally stripping away the nuance of action. You'll also see scholars applying Freudian and Marxist theories, sometimes controversially called Wendy's children, to deconstruct traditions. So instead of sacred texts being treated as spiritual guides, they're framed as tools for social subjugation. And wait, it goes further. Jainism, Buddhism, and Sikhism are sometimes just lumped in as mere Hindu reform movements. Advocacy groups point out that all this framing results in damaging stereotypes and even faith-based bullying for Hindu kids in schools because their faith keeps getting tied to oppression rather than enlightenment. This directly ties into Indology, which is the academic study of Indian history, literature, philosophy, and culture. Now, scholars like Adlery and Bakshi have been super critical of this field. Their argument? Historically, Indology prioritized European religious and political interests. It relied on this pseudo-historical method that totally missed the mark on the deeper spiritual and philosophical meanings of these texts. So the core issue boils down to this clash between two ways of studying a culture: the emic approach and the etic approach. The etic approach is the outsider gaze. It's the Western academic looking in through the glass and dissecting a tradition from afar. The emic approach, on the flip side, studies a culture from the inside, from the lived experience of the practitioner. Studying a living, breathing tradition almost entirely from that outsider etic perspective, that's exactly what creates the intense ideological friction we're talking about.
Section 3. Clashing systems of knowledge.
Because it's not just about historical bias, it's a fundamental clash in how truth is even defined. On the left, you've got the Western Abrahamic framework. Generally, belief is mandatory, and truth is literal, materialist, and exclusionary. Basically, being an atheist Christian is a total contradiction, right? But on the right, the Hindu framework is a completely different ballgame. Belief? It's optional. But inquiry and experience? Those are mandatory. It embraces the idea that truth exists in multiple states, and it actually accommodates contradiction. That is exactly why you can absolutely have atheist Hindus.
I love this quote by Dr. Vishnu Vardhan because it hits the nail right on the head. He says, like Schrodinger's cat, Hinduism exists in many states at once and collapses only when you choose how to observe it. Isn't that a brilliant way to put it? If you approach Hinduism demanding a rigid, singular, literal belief, you're using completely the wrong lens. The tradition asks you to inquire and realize, not just blindly believe.
So, with all this in mind, how on earth does the Hindu diaspora deal with this massive philosophical clash and academic friction? I mean, how do they ensure their traditions are taught authentically?
Well, that leads us right into Section 4, the push for Hindu universities.
The proposed solution is actually pretty straightforward, structurally speaking. To bypass those established Western biases, there's a big push to build dedicated, independent Hindu higher education institutions right here in America. The whole goal is to create spaces where that emic, that insider perspective, takes center stage, allowing people to study the texts, beliefs, and practices on their own authentic terms.
Section 5, comparing Shua and Vayu. Let's do a reality check and compare two real-world institutions trying to make this happen. It's super interesting because they take totally different approaches. We're looking at the Hindu University of America, or HUA, and the Vivekananda Yoga University, known as Vayu. HUA has been around since 1989, but it's unaccredited. It runs on a one-man visionary leadership model and has these broad religious seminary-style goals. Vayu, on the other hand, is way newer, founded in 2018, but it's already pre-accredited with WACS candidacy. It's run by professional academics and hyper-focuses on the evidence-based modern science of yoga. If we zoom in on HUA, you can see they're wrestling with some serious operational hurdles. They don't really have a traditional provost or dean structure. They rely on clunky open-source platforms like Moodle, and there's been some pretty controversial leadership history, like during the Swami Nithyananda era. Plus, their vision statement sometimes feels a bit, well, disconnected from academic reality. But to be fair, it's not all bad news. HUA has totally hit it out of the park when it comes to short-term community certificate programs. People really love those. Then you flip over to Vayu, and it's a completely different vibe. They are all about rigorous academic standards. We're talking leadership with decades of experience at major U.S. universities and academic partnerships with heavy hitters like Stanford, Harvard Medical School, and MIT. They've got a clear, mapped-out pathway to full WASC accreditation, and their ultimate goal is to become an R1 research university. But they're young, and because of that, they're currently facing real struggles with long-term financial stability and grassroots community outreach.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 6, the future of Hindu studies. So how do these institutions survive and actually reshape the academic landscape? Well, the author of the source material drops a pretty fascinating proposal, a merger. Think about it. You combine HUA's massive grassroots community outreach and funding success with Vayu's elite professional academic rigor. Merging that passionate community backing with top-tier educational standards could absolutely be the game changer needed to build a robust, undeniable institution.
And honestly, that leaves us with a massive question to chew on. As the Hindu diaspora navigates all this intense ideological friction, will these educational initiatives successfully decolonize their narrative and cement their place in American higher education? Or, without that cohesion, will they just fade out and become mere footnotes? It is going to be incredibly fascinating to watch this unfold. Thanks so much for hanging out with me for this explainer, and remember, keep questioning.